Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. In this episode, we talk about an Indian couple's battle with German authorities for the custody of their child. We also talk about 64 people dying in the UP district of Ballia in the past 4 days. But first, we talk about the India-China border crisis. It has now been over 3 years since the deadly Galwan Valley clash took place. For those who may not recall, in 2020, on the 15th of June, 20 Indian soldiers in Galwan were killed in clashes with Chinese troops on the line of actual control. The incident had taken place weeks after the Chinese had first transgressed along the Indian border in eastern Ladakh. The Galwan clash, in many ways, was a watershed moment in the ties between the two countries, which, despite multiple rounds of military and diplomatic talks over the past 3 years, have remained strained. In this segment, we are joined by Indian Express's National Editor of Strategic Affairs, Nirupama Subramanian, to talk about how the Galwan clash affected the border crisis and the current ground situation at the LAC. And she begins by recalling the incident for us.
So the Galwan clash happened, in fact, 2 months after the trouble first began in eastern Ladakh, when intrusions were first noticed by the Indian forces there. So immediately there were tensions and there was an attempt to engage with the PLA. And so, in fact, the first round of talks had already begun and there was a decision to disengage from this particular place, Galwan. And, there was going to be a buffer zone and all that had been decided. And then on the night of the 15th, I think the continued presence of the Chinese in what was supposed to be the demilitarized zone became a point of contention, and the Indian troops then confronted them and went to the spot and asked them to clear out their tents.
But the situation quickly escalated. At the time, there was an agreement that both sides would not use firearms. So when the clashes began, the troops used other kinds of weapons.
So both sides had batons, and from the reports of that time, what we know is that the Chinese batons were in fact studded with nails and wires and, those sharp sort of wires with spikes in them and so on. And Indian soldiers had fiberglass batons of the kind that perhaps CRPF and others use for law enforcement. So those were the weapons used. And then there was stone throwing as well.
20 Indian soldiers were killed this way. Colonel B. Santosh Babu, the commander of the 16 Bihar Regiment, who had walked up to the Chinese to ask them to leave, fell into the freezing Galwan River after being hit. In fact, some other Indian soldiers also died after falling or being pushed into the river. Now, some reports say that China actually lost more men in this clash, but their army has only acknowledged the death of 4 from their side.
The Chinese also took some of our soldiers prisoner. I think 10 soldiers were taken prisoner, and they were released after a day and a half or something, and there were negotiations for their release. So this is the incident that happened, but this is the first time since 1975 that there had been military casualties on the Indian side. So in a sense, Galwan was a watershed moment for the Indian military after many, many years. And, it was a shock because there had been these several border management and cooperation and coordination agreements that had been very painstakingly worked out from the early 90s, from 1993 until 2013. So when this happened, it was a big shock that a border incident could actually lead to this kind of, steep casualties. 20 soldiers on the Chinese on the LAC. For a long time, no one had heard of this kind of casualties or thought that this could become possible. So this was a very low point in India-China relations, and the relationship has not really recovered from this point.
She says that for the past 3 years, both the political and diplomatic relations have been frozen. But despite this, the two sides are still talking.
And this is what the External Affairs Minister Jaishankar said in a press conference on June 8th. To mark 9 years of the Modi government, there was a special press briefing by Mr. Jaishankar, where he did say, look, communications have not broken down between the two countries.
The day after Galwan happened, in fact, the morning after, I actually spoke to my counterpart. And since then we have engaged, the military commanders have engaged, our embassies have engaged, I have engaged with my counterpart, and I continue to do that. When Foreign Minister
Nirupama says that talks have happened at the political, the diplomatic, and the military level. In fact, there have been 18 rounds of military talks so far.
And because of those 18 rounds, they achieved something called disengagement at what are now called friction points. The points at which the Chinese intrusions took place. 5 points. So these are places where a disengagement has taken place. Disengagement means that troops that were staring at each other, that were eyeballing each other, were so close that any incident could be triggered, like the one at Galwan, have now stepped back. And there's been the creation of a buffer zone between them. Perhaps between 3 and 4 kilometers at each place is what we are given to believe, but there's no real official clarity on how big this or how large this buffer zone is.
She says that such buffer zones were created in Galwan after the clash, the north and the south banks of Pangongso, and the Gogra hot springs area. But right now there is an unease on the Indian side about the way these zones have been created.
Not articulated really by the government, but by retired army officers, by others in the strategic community, that, look, we may have given away territory through these buffer zones. That is, when the Chinese withdrew, they withdrew from territory that we claimed was ours. When we withdraw, we are withdrawing back from our own territory.
So essentially, by creating these buffer zones, some say that India has given up space they used to have in the area.
Now, the 2 points that remain, one is in the Dipsang Plains and the other is in Demchok. Now, these are issues that somehow have got painted as legacy issues. Now, this is a terminology that is being used now by both sides. The trouble here began much earlier, and these are not things that happened in April 2020. But this is a false argument. And I think we have to see it for what it is, which is that in Dipsang Plains, which the Chinese and Indians both see as a strategic area, from here, the Chinese fear that the Indians will have an advantage to start any offensive into Aksai Chin. We probably fear the same, that the Chinese can easily come here with their tanks and launch into us. So this is the fear. This is the fear that this strategic expanse of Dipsang Plains, we should not let go of it. There is a thing in the Indian strategic community. And to paint this as a legacy issue is to avoid the problem.
And this is because before April 2020, Indian troops were being allowed to access patrolling points beyond a place called Wainala. But now, they are being stopped at Wainala itself.
And this happened only from April 2020. Similarly, in 21, Ladakh has the nomadic tribes, and their principal occupation is sheep grazing. And some of these tribes have not been able to access areas within our claim line, within the Indian claim line, in Demchok, for instance, and they've not been allowed to access those areas up to which they were going in Demchok. So that's also a problem. That area has also become problematic. To say that these are legacy issues is sort of to paper over the problem. I think the Chinese seem to think that they can change without really going to war or anything. They seem to think that they can change the LAC through these salami slicing tactics of theirs, to prevent which we have to be militarily prepared. So we are doing that. We are building infrastructure on the border. We are building roads. We are trying to equip our troops better on the border. Also because on the Chinese side, after the disengagement, you don't really see a de-escalation of their infrastructure. In fact, what has happened is even after the disengagement, their infrastructure building has continued apace.
And it is because of this reason that India has increased its deployment in the region, from 15,000 before April 2020 to about 70,000 now.
So the LAC is now like the LOC, if you understand how serious that is that it's a hot border and you have to go by what the leaders are saying. So the military army chief, Manoj Pandey, has said that the border, the LAC is stable but unpredictable. Okay, those are words he has chosen very carefully, I am sure. And the foreign minister, our external affairs minister, has said that the situation is very fragile on the LAC. So things are definitely not normal. But what is there, unlike in the case of Pakistan, is an attempt to talk from both sides. Both sides are engaging in talks. There's no breakdown of communication, as Mr. Jaishankar pointed out in his briefing.
And besides this, she also points out that the trade between the two countries has continued to take place normally. Talking about the way forward, she says that the dialogue between the two sides must continue.
So I think the whole idea is, if you look at the future, for us to remain in engagement, to also be very aware that we cannot drop our guard, to prevent Chinese actions to change the border through unilaterally, to change the LAC unilaterally, by being prepared ourselves militarily, never dropping our guard, and also to insist that, the border issues have to be sorted out foremost. Because the Chinese view seems to be that, after this disengagement, we have really sorted it out and now it's time to move on. This is what the defense minister told our defense minister when he came here in April this year. And to also make the point to the Chinese that these buffer zones that have been created, this is not a resolution. Because, as you may have read also, that there was a paper submitted by a superintendent of police in Leh, where she pointed out that we had lost access to 26 of our patrolling points because of patrolling that was restricted by the Chinese or by our own decision not to move ahead. So we had lost, out of 65, I think we have lost access to 26 points. So we have to be really alert to that kind of thing. And we also have to convey to the Chinese that this is important. Settling the border issue is important before things can become normal again. And I think this is what the government has also been conveying.
And next we talk about an Indian couple who have been involved in a very long and messy custody battle with the state of Germany over their first child Ariha, who is 2 years old. The couple Dhara and Bhavesh Shah had moved to Germany almost 5 years ago. And Ariha was taken away from them by the German Youth Welfare Services in 2021 because they feel that the couple are not fit to take care of her. To find out the reasons behind it and what this case is about, my colleague Utsa Sarmin speaks to Indian Express's Sohini Ghosh.
Sohini, can you tell us what first led the German authorities to take away Ariha from her parents?
So basically, Ariha's parents went to the hospital sometime in mid-September 2021 when they found blood in her diaper. And they got her checked up and it turned out that there is a genital injury involved. The hospital immediately alerted the German Youth Welfare Services, which is known as Jugendamt. And few days later, the Jugendamt came to the couple's house in Berlin, Germany, and took the custody of the child temporarily. And back then, the general opinion of the hospital as well as Jugendamt, based on the hospital's opinion, considered this to be a case of sexual abuse. Eventually, by December 2021, the hospital cleared it, basically opined that this is an external injury and not particularly a penetrative injury. And by February 2022, the charges of sexual abuse that the family was facing, especially the father and grandmother and mother, it was dropped by the prosecutor. So basically, it did not reach till the court. Before it reaches the court, the prosecutor himself said that we are discontinuing the proceedings.
Right, but even after the sexual abuse charges were dropped, Ariha continued to stay with the German authorities. Could you tell us why that was the case?
Correct. So basically, once the sexual abuse charges were cleared, the Jugendamt had parallelly also instituted a case of parental negligence, basically implying that Ariha's parents are not fit to care for a child. And it is based on those parenting abilities that the Jugendamt continued to keep custody of the child. And the court trial too dragged on for quite a while. Ultimately, the judgment has come finally this month, earlier this week. And now it has been finalized by the court that the custody is going to remain with the Jugendamt.
And what did the German welfare services say during the hearing? And what were the grounds based on which they denied custody?
So, more or less, the ground was solely on the basis of that the parents are not fit. So there were allegations that the mother suffers from postpartum stress. There were also allegations, more like cultural differences that manifested into allegations such as that the mother massages the baby with oil before taking a bath. That is not something that is to be done to kids. Court-appointed psychologists' reports or the social workers' reports. While Ariha was technically in the custody of Jugendamt and the parents were allowed visitation, there were observations such as that the parents are too attached to the kid and that is in a way an attachment disorder. There were other observations such as the mother feeds the kid with her hand, feeds her too much. Kids should be taught to stop eating after a while. You can't be just plying them with food. So a lot of these cultural differences, it was portrayed as parental neglect or not fit to be a parent for this kid. And it is on that ground that the custody continued with the Jugendamt. The court has also observed in its order that, the genital injury that happened, till date, there is not a clear explanation as to how it happened. There are contradictory versions. The parents say that she was playing without a diaper in her play area and maybe a sharp toy kind of injured her. And on the other hand, there's the grandmother who says that she was told by a psychologist in India that Ariha is going to bleed as a baby from her genitals. So she was checking her genital area and in that process, she was injured and the injury exacerbated. So it's all a grey area ultimately, and that is something that probably the European authorities also use to bolster their cases.
Right, and now we understand that the couple has been in touch with the Ministry of External Affairs. So what have we heard from them regarding this?
So they said that since Ariha is an Indian citizen and since the German authorities feel or deem the parents unfit for parenting, then an appropriate middle ground solution would be that you hand over her custody to the Indian state and we will ensure that she is taken care of through the Indian child welfare committees. And although that statement was made by MEA, there were also pan-party support from MPs calling for her repatriation. Nothing to the effect actually moved in the German government or be it in the Indian government. So that is how this third-party arrangement came into being. Also, another factor was the parents were very adamant that she has Jain roots, she has Gujarati roots, and Jain Gujaratis have a very specific culture where, one of their most pressing concern is about food. So they don't even qualify under your traditional vegetarian diet, but their diet also does not include vegetables, which are essentially roots. So potatoes, for example, they don't have it. So the parents were very concerned that the Jain culture should be preserved in her. So taking all these into account, a person was identified in Ahmedabad named Ashok Jain, also from the Jain community, and it was proposed that maybe the custody can be handed over to him.
Right, but we know that this proposal was also rejected by the court, and the parents feel that their trial was not fair. So, do we know what they hope to do going forward?
So for now, they're pinning all their hopes on the Ministry of External Affairs, solely on the ground that she's an Indian citizen, and the Indian authority can thus ask for her repatriation to India on the ground that she's a citizen of India. And although they have spoken to the Indian authorities in this regard, there has not been any official statement from the MEA so far, post-verdict.
And Sohini, this entire thing reminds us of the Norwegian case involving Sagarika Chakraborty and her 2 children who were taken away from her by the Norwegian Child Welfare Services. And their custody battle went on for over a year. So could you talk about the kind of concerns these cases raise for Indians abroad?
Right. So there's something that the parents also pointed out, that their case is quite similar to the Norway case, which has now become quite popular post a movie on it. According to them, based on, they have been in touch with similarly situated Indians all over the world, but especially Europe, where this kind of a system is seen. It starts off with a cultural difference and then it snowballs into something bigger. And their concern here is based on also the experiences of other parents. So there have been parents who have been fighting for 5 years and then they just stopped fighting because they realized that this is going nowhere. So their greatest fear here is that she's at a very young age. She's less than 3 years. And if she continues to remain out of contact with her parents, she would eventually forget them or may not relate to them, relate to the culture, relate to what being Indian means or what India is. And after a certain point, the German authorities are going to ask the child also for her opinion, where she wants to live, how she wants to live. And when that point eventually comes, it might happen that she would say, I'm quite happy here. I don't know who these people are and I don't want to move back. And that would be like a final nail in the coffin for the parents, is what they fear.
And in the end, we talk about the recent deaths in Ballia. Over the past 4 days, a total of 68 people have died in the Ballia district of Uttar Pradesh. And although on Friday, the Ballia District Hospital Chief Medical Superintendent had said that these deaths happened due to heat stroke, he has now been removed from his post and the state is further investigating this matter. In this segment, Indian Express's Asad Rehman joins us to talk about it. Asad, could you begin by talking about the kind of heat the state has been witnessing for the past few days?
So across Uttar Pradesh, I think the maximum temperature in the daytime is ranging between 40 to 45. Ballia had slightly higher, marginally higher temperatures, and it's around 42, 43 degrees Celsius. And the temperatures across the state are very high. In the daytime, especially afternoon, it gets very hot and the sun is beating down. Plus, there are hot winds that are locally called Lu, which also, like speaking to doctors and experts in the field, they say that it drains your energy out and it makes your body completely dehydrated, which is why these issues happen, that people fall sick after being out in the heat.
And Asad, now 68 people have died in Ballia. But on Friday, when we had first heard about this, 34 had passed away. What had we heard from the authorities then?
So, the Chief Medical Superintendent of the Ballia District Hospital, Dr. Divakar Singh, on Friday evening spoke to the local media and said that in 2 days, 34 people had died due to heat wave conditions in the district. He had also said that the deaths are being caused because of the heat wave and because people who are above 60 years of age and who are already suffering with a chronic illness like hypertension, heart disease or diabetes. So he said that these people who were already suffering with some ailment or disease, chronic disease, that most of the disease were these people who were above 60 years of age and had died after they were brought to the hospital.
Right, and what did the state do after that?
So the next day, on Saturday, the chief medical superintendent, Dr. Diwakar Singh, was removed by the UP government, and it was said that Deputy Chief Minister, Mr. Brijesh Pathak, who's also the health minister of the state, released a statement saying that Dr. Diwakar Singh is being removed for giving a careless statement without gathering proper information. So Mr. Pathak, who's the Deputy CM, said that Dr. Diwakar had not gathered the facts and had prematurely jumped to the conclusion that the deaths were being caused by the heat wave. He was removed and a new replacement was sent in place of him, and a team was dispatched from Lucknow of senior health director level officials. A 2-member team was sent to Ballia to assess the situation and to present a report with their findings explaining why these deaths have happened.
And what do we know about these deaths from the state medical records? Do we have any more information about them?
So the reasons, the details regarding why these deaths have happened so suddenly and why the number is so high at the Ballia District Hospital is not very clear. But Dr. A.K. Singh, who's the Director of Communicable Diseases, Uttar Pradesh government, who's a part of the team which has been sent to Ballia to investigate the deaths and to present a report as to why these deaths have happened, he said that it doesn't seem like there's no evidence to link these deaths to heat wave yet. And the patients are getting admitted and then they are getting serious very quickly, and within days they're dying. So all the patients have been having issues, have had chest pain followed by fever and then some problems in breathing. So this is all the information that has been shared so far, and the Dr. A.K. Singh, who's in Ballia investigating these deaths, says that as and when more details come out, the team will share it with the media and with the people.
And Asad, have we seen such deaths happening in the state in the past? Is this very unusual?
So every summer there are deaths that happen, but for deaths to be reported from just one district is a little out of the ordinary, because if the heat wave conditions were the reason and if they were the only reason for these deaths to have happened, maybe they would have been reported from other districts as well. But so far as what we know and what the information that has been shared with the media so far, it seems like it could be something else. But in a day or two, we'll know more when the investigation by the team sent from Lucknow is completed. And they're also the team which is being sent, they're also collecting water samples over there to see if there's something wrong with the water that people are drinking over there. And as to why these people who already have chronic diseases, it's mostly them who are dying. So with time, I feel we'll know more about as to why this has happened and what the causes are and if it is heat wave, because the temperatures are soaring in Ballia, and Ballia is a small district in eastern UP with not a lot of health infrastructure. There aren't many hospitals, and the nearby cities where there are private hospitals are at least 3 to 4 hours away. So if a person wants to access healthcare near Ballia, then they have to either go to Patna, which is 3 hours, or they have to go to Varanasi, which is also 3 to 4 hours.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, with help from Utsa, Sarmin, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can also tweet us at Express Audio and write to us at podcast@indianexpress.com.